The champagne glass sailed through the air in a slow-motion arc as Karen's stiletto heels skidded on a slick layer of soap gel, her arms flailing like a frantic inflatable tube man at a car dealership. A groomsman lunged to save the teetering wedding cake, only to crash into the flower girl, who tumbled headlong into the gift table with a splash. Guests shrieked, the bride wailed, and a voice from the crowd hollered, "Is this a wedding or a water park wipeout?" I stood coolly in the corner of my own patio, arms folded, watching the pandemonium unfold, chaos that erupted just days. After Karen, the HOA's self-proclaimed queen of entitlement, smugly informed me I should feel privileged to lend my space. Lent without my say-so, mind you, and now justice was sliding in as slickly as that patio floor. 48 hours earlier, it had been an ordinary Thursday. I was savouring my morning coffee, chuckling as the neighbourhood cat staged a comical ambush on a squirrel in my backyard, when a sharp knock jolted me. A laminated flyer, duct-taped to my door straight from the HOA office, greeted me with the usual dull updates. Minor maintenance, waterline checks, blah blah. Tucked at the bottom in cheeky Comic Sans was a note about community event overflow, temporarily using shared amenities. I rolled my eyes, tossed it onto the counter, and carried on, until Friday afternoon, when I rolled home to find two guys hauling a portable dance floor and twinkling lights onto my patio, uninvited. Don't miss the fallout. Which city of the United States are you watching from? Drop a comment and share with us if you've had any confrontation with the HOA. We'll narrate your story on our channel. Not near it, not beside it, on it. The tile patio connected to my living room through sliding glass doors was being treated like a public park. I stepped outside in disbelief. The men wearing company polos that read Elegant Affairs seemed surprised by my confusion. One of them, a skinny guy with a clipboard and Bluetooth headset, glanced up and said, "Oh, this was the spot for the Monroe wedding." Karen Monroe's niece. I blinked at him, then told him very plainly that this was private property. He looked at the address again, said this was the spot on the work order, and suggested I take it up with the client. That's when she showed up. Karen with her oversized sunglasses, aggressive shoulder pads, and a voice that could cut glass. She marched up with a self-satisfied smirk, gestured at the patio like she was Caesar returning to Rome, and informed me, without a hint of hesitation, that the patio was being used for a very special occasion. I reminded her that it was private property. She countered that it was part of the community viewing deck as outlined in Section 4C of the HOA bylaws. I pulled out my purchase agreement, the deed with the property map. Karen literally rolled her eyes and waved me off like I was an intern at her imaginary empire. She informed me that the wedding was for her niece, that over 70 guests were expected, and that it would be a beautiful contribution to the community's spirit. When I told her to cancel or move it, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You should be honored." That was when something in me shifted. There's a line people like Karen always cross, a moment where they take your silence for weakness, your politeness for submission. This was that moment. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten, I just smiled. A dangerous, calculating smile. I told her she had 24 hours to get everything off my property. She waved me off again and walked away humming a wedding tune like I didn't exist. That night, I combed through every inch of my HOA contract. My property line was airtight. The patio was exclusive use, deed in writing. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer friend who confirmed what I already knew. Karen was bluffing, not just bluffing, flat out forging a use of authority she didn't possess. He also advised me to document everything and mentioned that going to the HOA board might delay things since the wedding was in less than 36 hours. That's when the plans started forming. It was when I saw the DJ equipment arriving and Karen setting up floral arches while sipping from a venti Starbucks like a monarch overseeing a coronation that I knew I wouldn't be able to stop her with words. She was too far gone, too convinced of her own fabricated version of reality. But I could make her regret it. She didn't know my background. Most people didn't. I'd worked for years in architectural safety systems, including surface friction, testing. I knew materials, I knew how they reacted, and I knew something Karen did not. What happens when a certain kind of soap-based gel is applied to tile floors and covered with dance rug? I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I wasn't evil, but
I wanted a lesson. I wanted a spectacle, something that would etch itself into HOA legend.
I went to a supply shop that still knew me from past projects and picked up a compound used in industrial cooling systems. It was odorless, non-toxic, and nearly invisible when applied in a thin coat. It turned tile into a skating ring. That night, when the patio was quiet and the fairy lights were dimmed, I applied a thin layer to every square inch of exposed tile, avoiding the entry rug so the effect would be delayed until everyone was fully in the groove. I cleaned up like a pro, left no trace of the containers, and even wiped my own shoes to avoid slipping. The next day, Saturday, wedding day, the sun was shining, the guests were arriving, and Karen was dressed like a matriarch in a bad soap opera. She avoided eye contact with me, but I noticed her glance toward the patio with pride. She was showing off, boasting to the guests about how she secured the most scenic venue with a bit of HOA diplomacy. I stood back inside my house, sipping lemonade, waiting. The ceremony went smoothly. Vows were exchanged, rings were slipped on fingers, people clap. Karen was beaming. But I knew the real show hadn't started yet. Not until the music did. And when the DJ played that first beat, when the couple took the floor, that's when it happened. The bride slipped, then recovered. But the groom, trying to catch her, did not. He landed hard, taking down the best man. Gasps turned to laughter, then confusion, then chaos. Like synchronized swimmers in a soap-drenched routine, one guest after another fell in what looked like rehearsed pratfalls. I watched as Karen froze, realizing something was terribly wrong. Then she stepped forward, her heel caught, and down she went like a bowling pin, crashing into a table full of appetizers. And that was just the beginning. After the chaos of the wedding crash landing in the patio's unofficial slip and slide, the scene quickly became a mix of screaming, slipping, and shaky phone videos capturing the mess from every angle. But to understand how it came to that level of controlled disaster, you'd have to rewind to the day before, the calm before the storm, when everything looked polished, organized, and deceptively perfect. It all started when Karen returned to the patio with a full event crew, strutting around in a faux leather clipboard holster like she was directing a Hollywood gala. She had her sunglasses on despite the overcast sky, barking orders at people, who clearly feared her passive-aggressive wrath more than the weather forecast. By noon, a full-on wedding venue had appeared on my patio. White tents, a makeshift altar, rows of gold-trimmed chairs. I even spotted a massive speaker system and an LED DJ booth, which made me wonder if she had rented out Coachella's leftovers. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't happening on my legally owned space. Rather than confronting her directly again, I stayed quiet and kept track of everything. I took videos, time-stamped photos, even got a drone snapshot from a friend in my architecture circle. I wanted documentation that this was not a community space, that it was in every way a hijacking. As I pretended to be indifferent, Karen was positively glowing. She walked around, greeting her relatives, mentioning how generous she'd been to pull strings and get this venue. One of the older women at the rehearsal dinner even patted her on the back and said, "You're always the fixer."
Karen.
That line echoed in my head while I mixed the industrial gel that night. The formula itself was relatively harmless but terrifyingly effective. It was used in warehouses to reduce fire-based friction on moving equipment, but had an unfortunate side effect. It turned smooth surfaces into a nightmare for anyone walking without heavy tread shoes. I'd used it years ago in a lab when someone dropped a bucket of it on a tile floor and the cleaning crew had to crawl out on their knees to avoid falling. That memory sparked an idea too juicy to ignore. I prepared the compound and did a test.
Run in my garage. A small patch of tile became an instant banana peel. My plan was officially in motion.
That evening, just past 10, when the wedding team left to rest for the big day, I put on gloves and rubber-soled shoes and got to work. I crept onto the patio like a secret agent, a mop in one hand and a small pressure sprayer in the other. The moonlight helped me see where to apply. I didn't need to cover the whole space, just the high-trach areas, the dance floor, the buffet line, the area in front of the DJ booth. I avoided the center aisle and rug paths to avoid early discovery. It had to be subtle, it had to be delayed. I also left small, dry areas where people could theoretically regain balance, but only just enough to keep it safe from actual injury. My goal wasn't to hurt people, it was to make a statement Karen could never erase. By the time I was done, the patio gleamed like it had been freshly waxed. I washed all my tools, scrubbed the soles of my shoes with vinegar to remove residue, and deleted any messages that might hint at my plan. I wasn't taking legal chances. I even had a timer to document when I returned indoors. The next morning, the scene looked innocent again. Karen arrived in a silky lavender robe and curlers, leading the makeup team and photographers. She didn't even glance in my direction. I guess she thought I'd surrendered, but I hadn't surrendered. I'd simply gone silent, and that was far more dangerous. By noon, the place was alive with activity. Guests arrived, dressed in their formal best, walking across my patio as if it were their family estate. Karen handed out wedding programs printed, with her name under host. I stayed inside, peeking occasionally through the blinds, sipping coffee and counting the minute. The bride appeared, radiant and distracted. The groom looked slightly overwhelmed. As the ceremony began, chairs filled, and I noted with satisfaction that the aisle and altar area was safe. No slip-ups yet. Everything was according to plan. As the officiant went into the vows, I noticed the photographer hovering above with a drone capturing sweeping footage. That meant they would have high-definition aerial footage of the entire patio during the eventual chaos. I couldn't have asked for a better way to prove where this wedding had taken place. The vows ended, applause rose, and people began to mingle. Tables were brought in, appetizers were passed around. The DJ began warming up with cheesy instrumental versions of pop hit. I could hear Karen from inside my home laughing dramatically, louder than anyone else, as if narrating her own sitcom. At one point, she loudly said, "This is why I always take charge. If you want something done right, do it yourself." "Oh, Karen, I agreed with you, just not in the way you thought." Then came the part I'd been waiting for, the dancing. The DJ started with a romantic slow song, coaxing the newlyweds to the floor. People clapped, phones came out, and the bride and groom took their places on the middle tile section, ground zero. They twirled once, twice. A moment of hesitation,
A slight wobble. Then the bride gasped as her heel lost traction. She stumbled into the groom, who tried to hold her, but ended up toppling backward with her landing on his chest. Laughter erupted at first, awkward, not unkind. Karen rushed forward, trying to help them up, only to slide herself and crash into the speaker stand. The best man took a step forward to assist and did a majestic, full-body slide into the food
Table. The DJ, clearly rattled, tried to switch the music to something upbeat, maybe hoping to turn it into a party moment, but instead more guests entered the zone and began slipping like it was an Olympic ice rink. Plates clattered, people screamed, and one old man literally used a chair like a walker to crawl to safety. The flower girl screamed and ran, only to launch straight into a decorative hedge. One woman stood up from the buffet and promptly slid under it. And Karen, poor Karen, her once perfect blowout was now full of leaves, frosting, and what appeared to be someone else's false eyelashes. From inside my glass doors, I watched the storm unfold. Never once stepping outside, I filmed, discreetly from my phone, capturing moment after moment as guests realized something was very wrong. Karen began shrieking, pointing in my direction, yelling things I couldn't hear. At one point, she pounded on the glass door, demanding I come out. I simply lifted the copy of the HOA agreement with my property boundaries highlighted and held it up to the glass like a museum exhibit. She looked like she might combust on the spot. As the guests began wiping frosting off themselves and calling Ubers, I noticed a few of them laughing. One man in a soaked suit said to another, "This is the most memorable wedding I've ever been to." And it was for all the wrong reasons. But for me, it was the moment I proved that property lines matter, that arrogance has consequences, and that sometimes the best revenge is the one that makes people slip right into humility. The aftermath of the patio disaster didn't look anything like the dream wedding Karen had envisioned. It looked more like a battlefield with toppled chairs, drenched tablecloths and confused guests limping away with frosting in their hair and appetizers stuck to their suit. The once elegant bride was now sitting on a flipped-over chair, tears streaming down her face, while her once pristine white dress clung to her legs in wet, sticky folds. The groom was trying to console her, but looked more like he wanted to disappear. The DJ had given up trying to restart the party and was instead packing up equipment while checking for cracks in his speaker system. Amid all of this, Karen stood in the center of the wreckage, red-faced, wild-eyed, and shaking with a fury so intense you could almost see steam rising from her shoulders. She charged straight for my patio door and banged her fists against the glass like she expected it to magically open out of fear. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I simply sipped my drink and gave her a look of utter disinterest. That's when she started screaming, accusing me of sabotage, criminal mischief, and some bizarre claim that I had ruined a family legacy. I quietly opened the door just enough to speak and told her with perfect calm that I had nothing to do with the chaos she had orchestrated. I reminded her she had trespassed, forged flyers, ignored multiple warnings, and hosted an unauthorized event on private property. She shouted something incoherent in response and threatened to sue me for every penny I had. I gently closed the door in her face. She wasn't done. Minutes later, 2 HOA enforcers appeared in front of my door, both looking uncomfortable as they tried to mediate the situation. Karen stood behind them, arms folded, glaring at me like a dictator ready to declare war. One of the enforcers, Dale, tried to reason with me, suggesting that maybe I had used something unusual on the patio. I told him I had cleaned my own property, nothing more, and reminded him that the patio was legally mine, not communal. I handed him a printed copy of the deed, complete with highlighted sections and official notary stamp. He flipped through the papers and frowned. Karen tried to snatch the folder from his hand, but he pulled away, obviously shaken by the clarity of the documents. Then came the unexpected moment that flipped the power dynamic completely. One of the wedding guests, an elderly woman in a green floral dress, stepped forward and announced that she had recorded everything. She said Karen had told everyone that this was just a formality and that the patio was owned by the community, not the resident. She also said she had filmed Karen laughing about how she put that smug little man in his place by using HOA muscle to commandeer the venue. The guest pulled out her phone and played the video. Karen's voice rang out clear as a bell, boasting about how she forged the community use notice and dared anyone to challenge her. The enforcers' faces turned to stone. Karen lunged for the phone, but the woman slipped it into her handbag and backed away, warning her not to touch her. Dale cleared his throat, apologized to me, and walked away without another word. Karen stayed behind, seething, then hissed through clenched teeth that she wasn't finished with me. I told her she was absolutely right. She wasn't finished. She was only just beginning to face the consequences. Later that evening, I received a call from a member of the HOA board. Unlike Karen, he was composed and even-toned. He apologized for what had happened and requested a formal meeting to discuss the incident. I agreed, as long as it would be recorded, and held in a neutral location. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up. Apparently, multiple guests had posted clips of the wedding online. One had titled it "The Great Wedding Slip-Up of the Century," while another labeled it "Karen's Greasy Matrimony." The videos had begun to gain traction, especially the ones where Karen was seen shrieking at the sky and sliding face first into the wedding cake. I found myself tagged in several local community groups where people were debating whether it was a prank, a legitimate accident, or some kind of karmic payback. I said nothing publicly. I didn't need to. The truth was starting to unfold without my help. I continued collecting evidence and created a single digital folder with all my documentation, photos, videos, deed copies, text messages, and voice recordings. I knew Karen was going to come at me swinging, but I wanted to make sure I had enough armor to turn her punches into boomerangs. 2 days later, the HOA meeting took place. It was an emergency session called by several members who were deeply disturbed by what had transpired. Karen arrived wearing an over-the-top blazer and tried to act as though she was the one hosting the event. But the mood was different now. Her usual allies sat with arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. The board president, a non-nonsense woman named Linda, began by asking Karen to explain the situation. Karen launched into a speech full of fake tears, blaming me for tampering with the patio and intentionally harming her niece's special day. She said I had sabotaged the wedding, endangered lives, and humiliated her in front of family. When she was done, Linda turned to me. I handed over a flash drive with all the documentation. The room went silent as they watched the videos and listened to audio clips of Karen admitting she had no right to use the space. At one point, her own voice said the words, "I don't care what the paperwork says. I'm the one who makes the decisions."
Around here, the silence afterward was deafening. Karen tried to argue that the clips were taken out of context.
That's when the elderly guest from before, who had also been invited to the meeting, stood up and said, "You can't take something out of context when you're the one who said it loud enough for the birds to hear." The board voted unanimously to strip Karen of her AO vice president position and suspend her voting rights until further notice. She was also issued a formal warning for abuse of authority, misuse of community perception, and falsifying documentation. But the real blow came when Linda read out a legal notice from the HOA's attorney stating that Karen would be personally liable for all damages and cleanup fees related to the wedding since she acted without proper authorization. Karen's face crumbled. For once, she had no comeback, no smirk, no snide comment, just silence. She picked up her purse, turned, and stormed out of the meeting room. As the door swung closed behind her, a few members let out audible sigh of relief. Linda turned to me and said, "You handled this better than most would have." I simply nodded and left without another word. That night, I sat on my patio, now clean and freshly sealed, and looked up at the stars. The calm was welcome. I could finally enjoy my space again without the constant threat of uninvited guests or rogue HOA plot. But I had a feeling this wasn't the end. People like Karen don't go quietly. They regroup, they scheme, they come back swinging, but the difference now was that everyone had seen her for who she really was. And the next time she tried to pull something, she'd be met with more than a mop and some soap gel. She'd be met with a community that finally knew the truth. The day after the HOA meeting, things were quiet. Suspiciously quiet. Karen's house, usually buzzing with activity and unsolicited HOA patrols, looked like a ghost town. Her decorative flags had been taken down, her lawn gnomes were gone, and even the motion-activated sprinkler, famous for randomly dousing dog walkers, was turned off. For someone who thrived on attention and authority, Karen had gone eerily silent. At first, I thought maybe the public embarrassment had finally done the job. Maybe she'd finally learned that her reign of HOA terror had ended. But deep down, I knew people like Karen didn't go into hiding. They went into planning mode, and, sure enough, it didn't take long for the retaliation to begin, just not in the way I expected. That evening, I received a knock on the door. It wasn't Karen this time. It was a crier with a thick envelope addressed in swirling cursive font. Inside was a legal notice, an official-looking document filled with the usual legal fluff and an aggressive tone. Karen, or rather her hired attorney, was suing me for defamation, property sabotage, and emotional distress. The part that really made me laugh was the last line, which claimed the bride was now in therapy due to trauma suffered from the event. I stared at the document in disbelief, wondering if it was meant as a joke. But knowing Karen, I realized she was dead serious. She was trying to flip the narrative, cast herself as the victim, and bury me in paperwork, hoping I'd panic and back down. But what Karen failed to consider was that I'd already prepared for this. I wasn't just a guy with a vendetta. I was someone who had taken every step with foresight, methodically gathering evidence like a squirrel prepping for winter. I immediately contacted my lawyer, the same one who had helped me verify the patio boundaries. He reviewed the documents, chuckled, and said the whole thing was fluff, completely baseless, and more theatrical than legal. But he didn't dismiss it. He suggested we respond thoroughly, calmly, and publicly, which was music to my ears. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to let the truth do what the soap gel had already started, make Karen slip on her own mess. Meanwhile, the internet wasn't done with her. The wedding footage had been picked up by a local news blog that specialized in viral community stories. They published a short article titled HOA Havoc, Wedding Wrecked by Rogue Planning, and featured still shots of Karen sliding across my patio like a hockey puck. The article was well written, neutral in tone, and even included my side of the story without me having to say a word. Someone from the wedding must have shared the truth. Comments exploded under the post. Some criticized me, assuming I'd sabotaged the wedding with evil intent, but most supported my position. They called Karen out for her entitlement and mocked the idea that someone would host a wedding on another person's patio without permission. Then came the podcast invite. A popular show called Suburbia Unhinged reached out to me through email. They specialized in bizarre neighborhood conflicts and HOA drama. They asked if I'd be willing to tell my story anonymously. I debated it. I wasn't after fame or followers, but I realized that letting others hear the real version might help protect others dealing with similar people. So, I agreed. They altered my voice and used a fake name, but the story they shared was unmistakably mine. The podcast episode was titled The Slippery Truth Behind a Wedding Day Meltdown, and within a week it had over 500,000 plays. Karen's legal team sent a second notice threatening to escalate if I didn't retract all public statements. I hadn't made any. The podcast host responded with a statement saying all their content was based on verified events and publicly available. Media. The pressure wasn't working. In fact, it was backfiring. Even people within our HOA started speaking out. A former board member posted a detailed thread about how Karen had long abused her role, bending bylaws and threatening residents who didn't fall in line. Several homeowners added stories of their own, fines issued for imaginary violations, sudden rule changes that always seemed to favor Karen's inner circle, and countless examples of her using HOA resources for personal benefit. At the next board meeting, attendance was at an all-time high. Karen didn't show up, of course, but Linda, the board president, laid out an agenda that made it clear the community was ready to clean house. A full audit of HOA spending was ordered. Karen's name was attached to over a dozen expenditures that had no proper authorization. Everything from landscaping upgrades outside her own home to catered lunches for planning sessions that only she attended. The community wasn't angry anymore, they were furious. And for once, their energy wasn't aimed at each other. It was focused on holding someone accountable. In the middle of all this, something unexpected happened. I received a knock on my door. This time from the bride, alone, no entourage, no Karen. She looked awkward, like she wasn't sure what to say. I invited her in, and she sat quietly for a while before speaking. She admitted she had no idea the patio wasn't part of the community space. Karen had told her everything was taken care of and that the owner was thrilled to offer his property. She apologized for the intrusion and said she wished she'd asked questions, but everything happened so fast. I could tell she was sincere. She wasn't the villain here. Just another person caught in Karen's hurricane of control. What she said next surprised me. She was starting a podcast of her own, a wedding disaster show where couples share nightmare stories from their big day. She asked if I'd considered joining for the first episode, not as the villain, but as the unexpected twist in her story. I agreed, mostly because the way she told it made even me laugh. She joked that slipping into her own cake was the most honest moment of her marriage. They had already annulled it, by the way. Turns out the groom had ghosted her a week after the incident, claiming he wasn't built for this kind of drama. Maybe the soap gel helped her see more clearly than vows ever could. That interview ended up being cathartic for both of us. She got to reclaim her story, and I got to show that standing your ground doesn't always have to come with bitterness. Sometimes it comes with slipping shoes, viral fame, and surprising alliances, but the funniest part came just days later. A neighbor sent me a video clip from a security camera. Karen, now shunned and out of power, tried to sneak into the HOA community barbecue, an event she once lorded over. She wore a floppy hat and oversized sunglasses, clearly trying not to be recognized. She made it 2 steps onto the grass when she tripped on a fold in the rug and landed face first into the lemonade table. Karma, once again, proving it had a sense of humor. At this point, my patio was not just famous, it was legendary. Kids in the neighborhood jokingly called it the slick zone. Even my Amazon delivery guy asked if he could take a selfie there. And yet, I'd never felt more at peace. The HOA was finally functioning like a rail board. Karen had been exposed. My space was respected. And best of all, I'd turned one of the most absurd, frustrating invasions of privacy into a story that made people laugh, think, and maybe, just maybe, draw a line before someone like Karen trampled over theirs. Weeks had passed since the chaotic wedding day, and life in the neighborhood had slowly returned to something resembling normal. Without Karen's daily interference, the HOA board became more efficient, meetings ran on time, and rules were actually enforced fairly for once. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other like survivors of a long, drawn-out war. There was something refreshing about watching a community start to breathe again, free from the constant drama that had turned even the simplest issues like mailbox paint color into full-blown feud. But even with peace returning, I wasn't foolish enough to believe Karen had truly disappeared. People like her don't vanish. They hide in the background, waiting for an opening. And just when I was starting to enjoy the calm, the final twist in this saga came crashing through in true Karen fashion. It started with a mysterious delivery truck parked outside my house early one Saturday morning. A man wearing a bright orange vest rang my doorbell holding a clipboard and said he had a work order to install surveillance equipment for community security upgrade. I told him he must have the wrong house, but he insisted my address was on the form. When I asked who placed the order, he said it was approved by the HOA vice president. The name on the form, Karen Monroe. My patience didn't just wear thin in that moment. It completely evaporated. She was gone from the board. She had no position, no authority. Yet here she was once again trying to worm her way into my property under the guise of safety. I called Linda immediately, who was just as surprised and furious. She confirmed Karen had no authorization to make any HOA requests. In fact, she had been explicitly barred from interacting with vendors on behalf of the board. Apparently, Karen had found a loophole, posing as an independent community consultant and forging HOA documents to issue requests. She had used the same strategy on another neighbor's property days earlier, trying to justify trimming a tree she claimed was blocking the neighborhood view. When challenged, she disappeared before anyone could confront her directly. But this time, she had made a mistake. The truck had cameras, the clipboard had fingerprints, and I had had enough. Instead of reacting emotionally, I stayed calm and documented everything. I asked the delivery guy for a copy of the form, which he hesitantly gave me after I explained the legal situation. I recorded the conversation, took photos of the truck, and filed everything into my growing folder of Karen-related evidence. Then I made a quiet phone call to an old acquaintance who worked in code enforcement and municipal fraud investigation. Karen had crossed the line from HOA pest to someone actively committing criminal misrepresentation, and this time there would be no HOA meeting to save her. While the legal wheels started turning behind the scenes, I had one final move left. Something petty, sure, but symbolic. You see, my patio, now clean and sealed, had gained notoriety. People still joked about it, but I decided it needed one last touch. So I commissioned a small, tasteful metal plaque to be embedded near the back gate. It read, "The slippery truth begins here." Underneath was the date of the wedding disaster. Nothing loud, nothing directly mentioning Karen, just enough for those in the know to smile when they saw it. The installation was quiet early one morning, but word spreads fast in a neighborhood, especially in one recovering from tyranny. Within 2 days, almost everyone had seen it. Some neighbors left post-it notes on my door, thanking me for standing up. One guy even offered me a tray of homemade cookies with a note that said, "For keeping this circus entertaining." I didn't do any of this for attention, but the support was a satisfying reminder that the community had my back, and they had seen Karen for what she truly was. Just when I thought things couldn't escalate further, the cherry on top landed squarely on Karen's doorstep. Literally, a formal notice from the city arrived at her home. Not only was she being investigated for impersonating a city official, but several homeowners had also filed claims against her for unauthorized access, vandalism, and fraud. She had falsely signed work orders, entered private properties, and used HOA branding after being removed from office. The city didn't take it lightly. A court date was issued, and a municipal hearing was scheduled to determine whether she would face charges. For someone who had once threatened to sue me for emotional distress, Karen now found herself on the receiving end of real consequences. But it wasn't the legal trouble that broke her. It was what came next. A group of teenage pranksters from the neighborhood, armed with nothing but harmless humor, decided to throw Karen a farewell party she didn't ask for. One night, using nothing more than biodegradable balloons and a projector, they staged a silent slideshow on the side of her garage wall. It featured every meme, video clip, and candid photo from the wedding incident. Karen came out to see what was happening, only to find a dozen people watching silently from lawn chairs as she slipped again and again on loop, her cake-covered dress blowing in the wind. No words were spoken, no one trespassed. It was theatrical karma at its finest. The next morning, Karen's house went dark, curtains drawn, mail left untouched. By the end of the week, a moving truck appeared. Quietly, without a word to anyone, Karen packed up and left. No goodbye, no announcements, no final tantrum. Just a silent departure marked by the squeaking of U-Haul tires and the satisfied sighs of relieved neighbors. Someone left a paper crown on her doorstep. The day after she moved out, it read, "Queen of Slips." No one claimed responsibility. Everyone claimed credit. As for me, life continued in peaceful silence. My patio remained a symbol, not of revenge, but of standing up when enough is enough. Every now and then, someone would ask if I missed the drama. I didn't, but I did miss the lesson. It brought the strange sense of unity that formed when one person's arrogance was finally held accountable. I kept the folder, of course, just in case Karen ever decided to reappear like a bad sequel, but something told me her days of running, the neighborhood like her personal thief, were truly over. In the months that followed, the HOA underwent significant reform. Term limits were established, transparency was enforced. The budget, once shrouded in mystery, became publicly posted. The board even hosted a community movie night on my patio by unanimous vote with full permission, signed releases, and not a single slipper hazard in sight. It was a full circle moment. We watched a comedy under the stars, neighbors laughing, kids dancing, everyone enjoying the space the way it was meant to be. Someone even joked that I should trademark the gel formula. I smiled and told them I already had. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the patio lights dimmed, I sat alone for a moment, taking it all in. It wasn't just about soap or sabotage or HOA drama. It was about knowing your rights, about not letting people walk over you, literally or figuratively, about standing your ground with patience, evidence, and yes, a little creativity. I didn't need to fight Karen with anger, I just had to let her fight herself.